The two lives of art. As architects, we are taught to think about buildings. We are seldom taught to think about the lives our buildings will lead after we have left them. For most of my career, I assumed that all creative work sought the same destination: permanence. A painter hoped that a painting would survive. A novelist hoped that a book would remain in print. A sculptor hoped that stone or bronze would outlive its creator. An architect hoped that a building would continue serving its community long after the ribbon-cutting ceremony had faded into memory. As I have grown older, however, it has occurred to me that permanence alone is not enough to describe the creative arts. There are, I believe, two entirely different forms of permanence. The first is the permanence of the work itself. The second is the permanence of society's memory of its creator. They are often assumed to be the same thing. They are not. This realization came to me while reflecting on architecture, but I eventually understood that it extends to every creative discipline. A haircut may be beautifully executed, but it survives only until the hair grows. A chef may prepare an extraordinary meal, but its existence lasts no longer than the dinner itself. Before the invention of recording technology, the performances of the world's greatest actors, musicians, and dancers disappeared the moment the curtain fell. Their reputations might survive, but the performance itself was gone forever. Painting occupies the opposite end of the spectrum. A canvas signed by Rembrandt or Monet remains permanently associated with its creator. A novel remains attached to its author. A musical score remains attached to its composer. A sculpture frequently survives for centuries with its attribution intact. Architecture occupies a curious and rather lonely position among the arts. Buildings often survive for generations. Some survive for centuries. The architect's name frequently does not. This observation led me to wonder whether anyone had examined the relationship between permanence and attribution as independent characteristics of creative work. Philosophers and sociologists have certainly explored many parts of the question. Nelson Goodman distinguished between works that exist as enduring objects and those that come into being only through performance. Peggy Phelan argued that the very essence of live performance lies in its disappearance once the performance concludes. Howard Becker reminded us that artistic creation is rarely the accomplishment of a solitary genius, but rather the product of complex networks of collaborators. Most influential to my thinking, however, has been the work of the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. Bourdieu proposed that achievement in the arts cannot be understood simply as the product of talent. Individuals move through what he called fields, in which economic capital, social capital, cultural capital, education, family background, and professional relationships all influence who succeeds and who becomes recognized. Success, in other words, is not determined solely by ability. It is also shaped by one's position within the social structure. Architectural sociologist Gary Stevens extended Bourdieu's ideas directly into the architectural profession. Stevens argues that architectural distinction is produced not simply by design ability, but also by education, professional networks, social background, mentorship, and access to influential commissions. His work demystifies architectural fame without diminishing genuine talent. It simply reminds us that talent alone rarely determines who becomes visible. These scholars have given us a richer understanding of creativity, collaboration, and recognition. Yet it seems to me that one question has received surprisingly little attention. How long does the work survive? And independently of that, How long does society continue to remember who created it? These are not the same question. Indeed, they often move in opposite directions. Architecture illustrates this paradox better than any other creative profession I know. During my own career, I participated in projects ranging from private practice to large engineering firms, military assignments, universities, and federal service. Many of those projects involved hundreds of people: architects, engineers, planners, estimators, contractors, consultants, and owners. They were genuinely collaborative efforts. When those projects were completed, there was seldom a plaque bearing the names of everyone who had contributed, nor should there have been. The buildings belonged to the communities they served, not to the people who designed them. In large architectural and engineering organizations, the firm receives the credit. The individuals quietly disappear into the organization. That is neither unfair nor surprising. It is simply the nature of collaborative creation. What is fascinating is what happens next. As the years pass, successful architecture becomes increasingly anonymous. The courthouse becomes simply the courthouse. The hospital becomes the hospital. The airport becomes the airport. The public no longer thinks about the architect because the building has become part of everyday life. Ironically, failure often reverses that process. When a building leaks, when concrete cracks, when windows fail, or when a roof collapses, everyone suddenly wants to know who designed it. The architect, previously invisible, becomes the center of public attention. In Norman, Oklahoma, for example, the city's new central library became widely discussed after significant water intrusion and subsequent litigation. Had the building performed flawlessly, it is doubtful that many residents would have known or cared who designed it. Its success would have allowed it to disappear quietly into the fabric of the community. Its failure made authorship suddenly important. That irony suggests something I have not encountered in the literature. Perhaps successful architecture accelerates the disappearance of its creator. The better the building serves its community, the sooner it ceases to be viewed as an architectural object and becomes simply part of everyday life. Unlike a painting, which forever points back toward its painter, architecture points away from its architect and toward its users. Perhaps that is exactly as it should be. Architecture has always been, first and foremost, a profession of service. A successful building ultimately belongs to its occupants. A school belongs to its students. A church belongs to its congregation. A courthouse belongs to its citizens. A hospital belongs to its patients. The architect quietly recedes into history while the building continues its work. That, I think, is one of the noblest characteristics of the profession. It also explains why architects should be careful about how they define success. Recognition is uncertain. Service is not. The buildings that have contributed most to civilization are not necessarily the ones whose architects remain household names. Many of the finest buildings in America stand in small towns and county seats, designed by architects whose names have long since disappeared from public memory. Their work remains, faithfully serving communities that scarcely know who created it. Perhaps that is the highest form of creative achievement, not to be remembered, but to create something worthy of being forgotten because it has become indispensable